Welcome, everybody, to this russosbrand.com WWE Draft SmackDown Live review. My name is Jeff Lane, and I'm going to bring on somebody new here to our video shows. You may recognize his name from russosbrand.com. He's been writing for us. I think it's been a month by now. If not, we're pretty close. Very entertaining articles on wrestling, movies, entertainment. Check out his stuff. But welcome, diehard Derek Gordon. Derek, how you doing, sir?
Thank you, Jeff Lane. I'm very happy to be here representing Russo's brand.
Now, for those that don't know, Vince kind of touched on this earlier. Talk about your brief, or I shouldn't say brief, but your past history with Mr. Vince Russo.
You know, it's a funny thing, and I like to give Vince the credit for almost breaking me into the business, but that was another guy named Rich Mancuso. But I mean, I was always, Vince was one of my idols growing up. We come from the same place. I'm from Brooklyn. He's from Long Island, but I followed him while he had his radio show, Vicious Vincent's World of Wrestling, and followed his entire career. And there had been a couple of times where I had gone to Titan once he had got associated with WWE or WWF at the time, and the magazines is Vic Venom, and had been offered a couple of internships, but you know, kid from Brooklyn can't travel to Connecticut every day. But you know, I've known Vince for a long time and did some business with him when I was running NWA cyberspace in New Jersey, and you know, like I said, it's a great honor to be part of Vince's brand.
Well, we're glad to have you, man. Glad to get you here on the video stuff too. Like I said, everybody, make sure you check out Derek's stuff. But Derek, we're here to talk about the WWE draft, and there's some mixed feelings on this. First, I'm going to say I enjoyed this episode, A, because it was only 2 hours, goes much faster than a 3-hour Raw, and B, it was something different. So we were just watching a normal WWE wrestling show. Other stuff was thrown in the mix, but we kicked off with the first 5 picks, and the rules were simple. Every other pick, but Raw got 3 picks to SmackDown's 2 because it was a 3-hour show to a 2-hour show. So, of the first group, Raw ended up with Seth Rollins, Charlotte, and Finn Balor, who was the number 5 overall pick. Those were the 1, 3, and 5 picks. And at 2 and 4, SmackDown picked Dean Ambrose and AJ Styles. So, what are your thoughts here on the layout of this top 5?
I mean, I think it's a little predictable that Seth Rollins was going to be the number 1 draft pick, especially for Raw, considering that, you know, Triple H and Stephanie are pretty much in favor of that brand. I was surprised to see Dean Ambrose actually take the title to SmackDown, but at the same time, it doesn't make a difference. I know later on the show we'll discuss this when the Miz ended up getting drafted, they stated we need that Intercontinental title, we need that on our brand. And to be honest with you, it doesn't make a difference. If this guy drops the belt tomorrow, the belt's not on the brand anymore. But again, I mean, you know, their rules, it's all up in the air and creative. I wasn't impressed. I wasn't happy seeing Charlotte being the number 2 selection for the Raw brand. Finn Balor, I mean, we all expected that. You know, he's going to be the next hot commodity. And like I said in the article a little earlier today, Raw, that brand, it makes stars, and SmackDown itself needs the stars to make the brand. So that's why I see them picking up guys like Dean Ambrose, John Cena, and AJ Styles.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see where the title goes on Sunday, because even though Ambrose successfully defended on this show, he could lose it on Sunday. They may split the titles. Who knows what's going to happen there? So at least that's interesting in my opinion. The number 5 pick of Finn Balor, I find this very interesting because I understand why they did it. Obviously, they have a lot of faith in this guy. They think this guy is the next big thing. So they need to introduce him to their audience. A lot of people don't know who he is that don't watch NXT, but what they just did right here, by instead of making him like the 15th pick or the 20th pick, by making him the number 5 pick, the people that don't know who he is are sitting back and going, wait a minute, who is this guy? Why did he just get picked before John Cena? Why did he get picked before Roman Reigns? Why did he get picked before Brock Lesnar? So he kind of got a rub from those guys without even stepping in the ring with them. So I think that's why they did this here, and that makes sense to me.
You know, to be honest with you, the Finn Balor thing, it's a big thing. You know, everybody's been waiting for Finn to get called up to the main roster. And I understand, you know, a lot of questions going on with like, why, how could this guy, considering that he hasn't competed on the main roster yet? Sure, we've, you know, the majority of the WWE universe has watched him on NXT, but again, there's a big portion that doesn't follow NXT. But then when you question why was he selected before John Cena, and clearly I think my answer to that would be that John Cena is pretty much on his last lap in his career. I mean, he's already doing a bunch of projects in Hollywood. He's got a couple of reality shows. And I think they're building for the future. And considering that Finn Balor comes in with this body of work that the fans can just literally grab onto and say, man, that's a guy I can follow, considering the loss of Daniel Bryan to the roster. Seeing a guy like Finn Balor with the paint, his athleticism, and what he brings to the table, like I said, I'm not surprised that he was drafted that high.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to need to keep him in that paint at all times. I think that's one of his big characteristics. He's not very strong on the microphone, in my opinion. I think he needs those types of advantages, but at least they put him in this spot where they're giving him a good rub going in for the fans that don't know who he is. We had a match next. John Cena beat Luke Gallows. My issue with this match, and I just don't like when they ignore the rules of wrestling. The referee makes a 3 count here with Enzo and Cass in the ring, who weren't even in the match. That unless this is a no DQ match, you shouldn't be making that count. But I'm not going to sit here and nitpick a match when we're here to talk the draft. So, Derek.
Well, let me ask you a question, Jeff.
Sure.
How do you feel about Gallows doing the job for Cena? I mean, they're trying to build up the club. They're trying to build up this potential threat to the entire roster because everybody knows what the Bullet Club is. And having Gallows, lay down for Cena this early, since they've only been in the organization, 2 months now. I mean, I think it's a weak move on creative to say, you know what, let's use him as a sacrificial lamb because we still have John Cena is the face of the company, and granted, it's not AJ Styles laying down, but it kind of weakens the presence of the club.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't think it hurts them for this one reason: is they're still a tag team. So their strength is the tag team. If they were splitting up and Gallows was now a single star, I would see that point. But I really don't think it hurts them being that they're still going to be a tag team, in my opinion. But what are your thoughts here? Now we get Roman Reigns picked. Okay, crowd doesn't like it, of course. I felt like this was a heavy internet crowd here in Worcester. They reacted to a lot of the NXT guys. So, of course, Roman was going to get the boos. That's expected. Then Cena, then Lesnar. So 3 big names picked right here. 2 of them who are in drug scandals. I mean, we don't know if it's drugs with Reigns, but it's some type of failed test. Lesnar failed another test, or it was announced that he failed another test today. Cena squashed in the middle as, one of the top guys of all time. And then Randy Orton and New Day. So what are your thoughts on this second group of 5 here?
It's like I mentioned before, Raw is a brand where you got to make a star, and they're still in that position where they don't understand what they got to do in order to get Roman Reigns over. Moving him to SmackDown, which hasn't been a proven brand yet. We don't know what the numbers or what the audience is going to be like. Plus, we are short an hour on that SmackDown on Tuesday nights in order to get Reigns over. It makes sense keeping him on the main show. As for John Cena, like I mentioned before, he's pretty much on the last lap of his career, and SmackDown does need that name credibility. They need that rub in order to draw fans in on those Tuesday nights. In terms of Brock Lesnar, I mean, I don't know, man. To be honest with you, I wouldn't have drafted Brock Lesnar at all, considering that he's a part-time player, considering all the controversy that's going on now between him failing the drug test and all the nonsense going on with the UFC. I would have kept him off the radar and had the fans wondering, what about Brock? Where's he going to end up? And then once the smoke clears with his personal issues, then I would have added him to a brand or maybe made that announcement as we get closer to SummerSlam. In terms of Randy Orton, that's another guy. I mean, a little bit injury prone, one of the best workers in the game. And again, it's a name that's going to draw more faces and more eyeballs to that SmackDown brand on Tuesday nights.
Yeah, and I totally agree there what you just said about Cena, because he's by far the most pop culture worthy guy, the guy the masses know. They all know John Cena. So with him going to SmackDown, that puts that second show now in the public's eye. I agree 100%. I think that's a good move, putting Cena on SmackDown to try to get, people to watch that show as well. You brought up a good point there with Brock. I think it would have been cool if maybe Heyman got involved here somewhere. My client is withdrawing from the draft or something like that. Just do some storyline, make them tune into the pay-per-view to see where he's going to go. I like that idea, man. And maybe, but oh well, we at least know that Lesnar's on Raw. So, I don't know. Maybe they figure put him on the stronger show just in case something happens and they have to take him off because of these failed tests or whatever. If they even hold him responsible for it, who knows? It might not even violate their own wellness policy. So
I think where they're going to have trouble with that is that, to my understanding and for whatever the reports have been saying, is that depending on the level of his suspension in the UFC, it might have some sort of impact with the states that have a state athletic commission. So if the WWE is running a pay-per-view or a live event or a Raw or a televised event for that matter, and he can't perform in that state, let's say it's New York State, who does have a very heavy athletic commission. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem. So, I mean, now the WWE office has to shuffle around, figure out where they have to put their pay-per-views. If this, in fact, becomes a 2-year suspension, now they have to strategically place where Brock can work and where he can't work because of those levies.
Yeah, and especially with every state having different rules. That's a good point, man. We have another match next. It's Rusev and Miz defending against Zack Ryder and Darren Young in the Champions versus Challengers match. And I love the end of this match because Darren Young gets the win with Mr. Backlund's cross-face chicken wing, and the crowd went absolutely insane. I'm liking this Darren Young and Bob Backlund stuff. What are your thoughts on the pairing of these two? Have you seen a lot of it?
I've seen a little bit of it. And I think I've seen enough of it in order to understand where they're going with it. I'm not necessarily sure how that pairing of Backlund and Young would come about and make sense to let's say an old school fan who followed Bob Backlund. But at the same time, you're right. Him getting that rub from a former champion, from a Hall of Famer and a legend is good, especially in his pursuit for the Intercontinental title. On the flip side of that coin, though, Zack Ryder is the one that, I got a lot of love for Zack Ryder. He's a New York guy, Long Island guy. And I was so disappointed seeing him drop that strap the night after having that WrestleMania moment and then not even being in a championship picture. So I'm glad to see him getting the work again, getting a little bit of that push. But when you're going to square him off against a guy like Rusev, we kind of know where that one's heading.
Yeah, I think we do know where that's heading, but hopefully they get him involved somewhere in this brand split and get him a more important storyline. Bray Wyatt versus Xavier Woods was next, and I'm going to tell you, man, I love the beginning of this match because this is what Vince and myself complain a lot about, match psychology and storylines. The beginning of this match, they probably went a good 20 to 30 seconds after the bell rang before they even got close to touch. And you could tell Xavier was nervous. He was scared to be in there with Bray with all the mind games he's been playing. That's good in-ring psychology. When you can build drama without these guys even touching, that's good stuff. That's what I like to see. So I was glad to see that. Bray Wyatt gets the win here, though, over Xavier Woods. And at the pay-per-view coming up, we'll have the 6-man match, New Day versus the Wyatt family. So let me ask you this, because as of this airing, we don't know the entire finish of the draft. They're doing it on the network right now. Derek and myself are recording this immediately after SmackDown. Do you see any reason? Do you think Bray being selected separately in the upcoming section without the Wyatts, do you think they're going to be split up here? And is that a good thing for the other guys like Strowman and Rowan and Harper when he comes back? They split up the Wyatt family a couple of months ago, or about a year or so ago, prior to WrestleMania. And, granted, they had success as singles. Like, man, I think it was a lot longer than that. It must have been before last WrestleMania. But again, Luke Harper went off, won the Intercontinental title. The other guy, the redhead Rowan, I mean, he was doing a couple of things here and there. But again, they never had that synergy like they had as a unit. Now, I know leading into WrestleMania 32, there had been original talk of The Undertaker facing Braun Strowman, but clearly that didn't happen, and for obvious reasons. Splitting them up now, I think it might make more sense to keep the Wyatt family together in terms of Harper, Rowan, and Strowman, but without their leader. Sending Bray Wyatt over to SmackDown, they're like, oh no, what do we do now? We lost our guiding light. We lost the lantern holder. What do the three of us do? And then we can finally creatively see these three wreak havoc in the WWE because they have no guidance. Now, whether or not, again, just not steering off the track here, but one thing that I hope they don't do with this brand split that would literally just kill everything is having that cross-pollination, having those mega shows, those super shows where, you're having a run-in from a Raw guy or for bragging rights. They really need to keep these brands separate. And I think that if you're going to split up the Wyatt family and have Bray Wyatt on SmackDown where he can't be touched, where he
can't offer that guidance, where he's not in the corner to give those 3 lost souls, I think that there's a lot of creative booking and a lot of potential there. But in terms of their value, Luke Harper is money all the way. Rowan and Strowman, those guys are a toss-up any other day.
Yeah, and again, they could have got drafted to SmackDown as well by this point. We don't know yet, but I hope they stay together, because when you mentioned they'd been split up, last year, whenever it was, it didn't work. So I hope they keep them together and they actually do something meaningful with them. Out of these next 5 picks, Raw gets Sami Zayn, Sasha Banks, and Chris Jericho at number 15. SmackDown got Bray Wyatt and Becky Lynch. So the first woman of SmackDown's roster is Becky Lynch. Sasha joins Charlotte on the women's side. I did see before we came on here, they had tweeted that Paige also got drafted by Raw on the post show or whatever. So it looks like Raw is starting to have the stronger female roster, in my opinion. They also picked up Lana later on. So what are your thoughts on the female side of things? Natalya went to SmackDown also, so later on.
Well, considering the fact that, Charlotte currently is a champion and the fact that she has the Flair name behind her, it makes sense to keep her on the flagship show. And considering that it seems like creative is going in the direction of making Sasha Banks the next champion come SummerSlam, it makes sense to keep them on that flagship show. But at the same time, like you just mentioned, it didn't seem like the SmackDown brand had much of an interest in the women's wrestlers by only selecting Natalya and Becky Lynch, who ironically are currently in a feud right now. So that would make sense for them and their booking sheet at the moment. But at the same time, it doesn't look like they have a grander outlook. It looks like SmackDown just might be one of those shows where they're introducing you female talent who may end up challenging that belt later on, especially if they start letting the belt be defended on both brands or in the pay-per-views themselves. But again, it doesn't look like SmackDown has a huge interest in the female championship or having that female roster there. But lo and behold, I mean, anything can happen, because just because the champion was drafted to a brand doesn't necessarily mean that the title is going to remain there.
Yeah, and I was surprised that Nikki Bella was not picked in the first 30 picks. I don't know if that's a bad sign for her recovery from her injury. I guess we'll see if she gets picked in the second 30, but I was still surprised by that, especially with Neville getting picked, who's been on the shelf. I think Nikki Bella is still a big draw. The casuals love her, the little girls love the Bellas, you know what I mean? So I don't know if that's a good sign for her injury or not. Hopefully she's all right. We had. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Just to chime in on that Nikki Bella thing. I think the thing with Nikki is, yeah, you're right. She is a draw. She's one of the best looking females on that. She's had her run with the championship. So right now she's more of a novelty. She's more of a gimmick to sell the fans, almost the same way John Cena is to SmackDown, but she's not necessarily a contender to this new generation and this new Divas Revolution. The U.S. title went to Raw with Rusev, and the Intercontinental title went to SmackDown with The Miz. Raw also got Kevin Owens, putting Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn on the same show. Baron Corbin goes to SmackDown, and then Enzo and Cass went to Raw. And you mentioned how it didn't look like SmackDown was making a big attempt to build a women's division by this layout that they're having them pick. It looks like that they're putting the tag team emphasis on Raw as well. Again, we don't know who's going to get picked in the second 30 at this point. We already got the New Day going to Raw. We got Enzo and Cass going to Raw. Gallows and Anderson were the next pick by Raw, where SmackDown at this point, they don't have any tag teams. The first tag team they get is American Alpha. So it looks like the first 30 anyway, Raw has the advantage as far as roster strength tag teams as well. It's funny, Jeff, because when back many moons ago, when they did their draft or their brand split and they did the Raw versus SmackDown, everybody wanted to compare it when they were asking, well, I don't get it. Well, what's the point? What are they going to do with this? And they always compared it to baseball, saying that you'd have the American League and the National League. And in my opinion, I'm a huge, big, monster big baseball fan. And by the way, I'm popping for your Yankees hat right now. And to me, growing up, the American League was always the powerhouse. They always had the big guys. And naturally, to me, that made sense because they had the designated hitter spot, whereas the National League was always the speedsters, the base stealers, the pitchers. And
And I feel like that's what we're looking at here with Raw and SmackDown is that, yes, you are taking a lot of your powerhouses, your big merchandise money-selling names, and putting them on that flagship show where you can dedicate the 3 hours to them, build the stronger pay-per-views around those names. And on the flip side of the coin, they're taking SmackDown. And while they still have names like Dean Ambrose, John Cena, Randy Orton, Bray Wyatt, it may not necessarily be speed, but it's you're almost seeing a little bit of that younger generation there, guys who aren't necessarily finessed. I know that they drafted guys like Dolph Ziggler, a guy who in my mind should be a main eventer anywhere. I don't know if he's got heat with the locker room, but maybe this is his second chance because he couldn't perform the way he should have been. He was getting buried and used as fodder on Raw. Guys like Alberto Del Rio, who is a phenomenal champion, but really hasn't had the competition ever since he's returned back to the WWE. So maybe he gets that second window on Raw. And when you bring up guys like American Alpha, Jordan and Gable, those guys, I mean, you've got so many teams in the division, in the tag team division on Raw, that you don't want to take these young rookies and throw them in there to the Sharks and feed them to guys like Gallows and New Day, so more established teams. So it makes sense for them to make a name on SmackDown, where there's only 2 hours. They haven't proven their audience, but who knows down the road, if they can make a name for themselves there, they'll move on to bigger and better things in Raw in the future.
Yeah, and with American Alpha there and Nia Jax getting picked shortly after that for Raw, those are 3 NXTs of the 6 that they said were going to be picked. So in my opinion, I feel like these are the 3 they're the highest on. They wanted to give them recognition by having them picked in front of the television audience instead of the network diehards, you know what I mean? So they picked these 3 to be shown on SmackDown. I would expect those 3 acts to get the biggest pushes at the beginning anyway. So we still don't know who the other 3 were at the recording of this anyway. That's taking place right now on the network. We look at this, and I thought this was kind of strange. Like, they made Kane look strong on this show. They had him double choke slam Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, but then he didn't get picked, and the Big Show did. So it was kind of, I didn't understand that. I don't know. I don't think the Big Show needed to be picked in the top 30, but they probably did it to look realistic. Like, who wouldn't pick this guy if it was real? So I'm sure that's why they did it. But any thoughts on the final 10, really? We covered Gallows and Anderson, American Alpha, Big Show. You mentioned Ziggler, Nia Jax, Neville, so I'm assuming he's coming back soon, Natalya, but Del Rio, and Cesaro and Sheamus were kind of there. So thoughts on that last grouping?
Here's a couple of thoughts I have. First off, I'm surprised Cesaro is still on Raw. Cesaro, phenomenal worker. He's going to be a champion in the future. He may be one of the top guys, but he's not there yet. He still hasn't found that hook that connects him to those fans. So I would think that they may have just given him the opportunity to go to SmackDown to develop the personality, work on the mic skills, but instead they are keeping him on Raw. Baron Corbin, I'm not sold on that guy. Now, that guy has potential. And to be honest, if the pencil were in my hand, yeah, I'd separate Bray Wyatt just the way they did now, but then I'd bring Baron Corbin in as part of that Wyatt family. I don't see the strength that he has on his own. I don't see the selling potential in Baron Corbin just yet. So I see him fitting the SmackDown mold, but for the first top 30, I'm bewildered by that. As far as Sheamus goes, I mean, I've never been a big Sheamus fan per se. I mean, he's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got the resume, but I've said it once and I'll say it again. I don't think there's a fan out there that ever paid to see a Sheamus match. So keeping him on the main brand, he might have been better off giving that experience and that veteran rub on some of the new talent and try to get SmackDown over. But it's like you said, seeing guys like the Big Show getting drafted in the first 30, granted, you can't ignore a giant. You can't look at this 7-foot beast and just say, we'll if nobody picks him, we'll take him later. But I mean, it makes sense. Somebody's got to grab a giant. But again, like I said, creatively, I'm looking at the age factor. I mean, how many more miles does the Big Show, Kane, John Cena, how many more miles do they have left in their tank? And I think this draft here was really to introduce all that new talent and really to start directing fans over to NXT and saying, hey, they may not have been drafted now, but that is the future of this organization. That's the future for the next 30 years. So keep a close eye on them.
Yeah, interestingly enough, 8 months ago, they made Sheamus their world champion, and 8 months later, he's only the 30th pick in the draft. So you wonder, the creative reasonings for stuff like that, where it comes from. Championship match. Before we get to that, I just want to say this because a lot of people were upset with me on Twitter tonight because I wasn't jumping for joy at the draft and the prospect of the rosters, but I want to explain why. And to me, this is key. You gotta understand, all of these guys have been on the same show for however long, and the show has not been good. So splitting them up and watering down the two shows doesn't necessarily make it better. The other thing is, if the writers are the exact same people and they write the exact same way, it doesn't matter which guys are on which show. It's still going to be awful. So that's why I'm hesitant. I want to see it first because I've gotten excited before with things and they've let me down. I want to see a new creative direction. I want to see effort by the creative team. I want them to make me excited to watch Raw, excited to watch SmackDown. So until that happens, I'm not going to get excited by names on a paper. I want to see what the guys with the pen do on their paper and give me a good show every Monday and Tuesday. So that's why I'm not jumping for joy. What are your thoughts on that, Derek?
I feel the same way. And we had discussed this. Eric Bischoff had made mention of this a week or two ago on Jim Ross's podcast, on Podcast One, stating that, when you have two different brands, they have to feel like two different brands. You just can't change the colors, have one red, one blue, but it's almost like having Raw Light on Tuesday nights. You don't need it. In an article, which we had discussed a little bit earlier, that's on russobrand.com that I put on there, I would have done something totally different. When they turn on SmackDown, you see, the fans right now, WWE Universe is preconditioned to seeing the same old crap day in, day out. And like they said, it's different color ring ropes, different color pyro, different this, but with the same names. So I can't get excited over this roster on paper and who they picked and who they selected, because I want to know how they're going to be utilized. That's the key to the success of this. And that SmackDown brand has to feel different. It has to feel innovative. It has to feel like NXT or ECW or even TNA for that matter, where we're just saying, hey, you know what? Raw's been around for 25 years. We have the opportunity to try something different, to change the game, to test the waters and do things that were never done before without risking the reputation of our 25-year-old flagship show. Now, am I excited? Like you said, Jeff, I'm not excited based on the names they picked. It means nothing to me. I want to see what happens next week, because it's not so much the talent that's in the ring. It's the guys behind the curtain forcing and putting the words in that talent's mouth and putting that show on and saying, hey, tonight, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to tear it down. We're going to give Raw a run for their money. And you really have to treat it like it's another company. And that's the biggest problem, is that it's not another company. It's just more profit for Vince McMahon. So until I see change, I ain't believing a damn thing.
Ambrose retains against Seth Rollins in the main event here. And I was incorrect in my assumption after Raw. I thought the double pin, they're going to do something. They're going to split the belts, so each show has a belt. This tells me something different now. Ambrose got a clean win here over Rollins. He's still the champ. I mean, there's no controversy. There's no way they can reverse this finish. So now I'm kind of thinking maybe they aren't splitting the belts. Maybe that's what they want us to think. We still got the pay-per-view on Sunday and the triple threat match. We don't know what we're going to do there. On the spot, Derek, would you have a belt for each show? Would you have two heavyweight champions?
No, I wouldn't have one. I mean, I was going to put this up earlier today and explain what I would do with the heavyweight championship. First off, if it's the same company, it's the WWE, then you just need one WWE championship. But what you do is you build it as a pyramid. Your champion is up on top, and he has competitors climbing the ladder from the left on Raw and competitors climbing to the ladders on the right on SmackDown. And then, again, it takes me back to the After mags, when I used to buy those back in the 80s and 90s and grab the magazine, flip to the back, look at the rankings, say, oh man, this guy is a contender. This guy he's moving up the ladder. He's going to be challenging soon. That's the feel I want to get from Raw and SmackDown. So have that one belt, have that champion at the pinnacle, but he's got threats coming from two separate brands. And that's the way I'd book it.
Yeah, I don't like two belts. I think you need a top guy, and I think fans are always deciding in their mind, okay, which belt is more important. They're still doing it in their head. They don't see them as equal titles, so I hope they keep one belt. Derek, before we sign off here, tell everybody where they can follow you on Twitter. tell them about your podcast, anything you want to plug, my man.
All right, man. I do appreciate the time. And first of all, Jeff, I want to say thank you to you and Vince Russo for bringing me on the brand. I'm having a blast there. And, I was going through some personal things and dealing with some issues here, but you'll be expecting a lot more articles and a lot of video coming up soon. So, Jeff, we definitely have to talk about that. I've got some unseen footage of Vince that I like to put out there and then share with you guys. But you fans can find me out there on Twitter. Please follow me. I need those numbers boosted up. It's diehard Derek G. Derek is Derek, just like Derek Jeter, but of course, he's a better shortstop, and I'm just better looking. But that's diehard Derek G on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, diehard Derek, diehardderek.com, and just check me out here on Russo's brand because I'm having a blast with you guys.
Yeah, we're glad to have you, my man. Again, follow me on Twitter at JeffLane22. Thanks for joining us for this draft recap. For diehard Derek, for Vince Russo, my name is Jeff Lane. Check out russosbrand.com for all our content, and we'll see you next time, everybody.